Okay, 206. So this video lesson is going to be about reverb and delay. And again, I'm recapping what I talked about yesterday in class and just preparing you for assignment 2 and talking about plugins and what have you. If we go over to Google Classroom, you can see again your assignment here, which is that you need to create a second 1 minute audio project, okay? And it needs to obviously you need to use recorded sounds or sounds downloaded from the internet. And I will talk about the internet portion and downloading sounds and using them on Wednesday and Friday in your class. But this is just to get you prepared to be using plugins in Logic and also, basically get you up and running for what you need to do. So we're creating a 1 minute project in length, not exceeding a minute and a half. We're using reverb and delay in your project. You can also use any other plugins you want too. So feel free to explore all the different effects you can use, but the ones that are required are reverb and delay. You need to use panning, of course, to create a sense of distribution across the stereo field. And your project must have at least 4 audio tracks, all right? You can also use software instruments if you want, but you're not required. And I'm not going to really go over those until next week. So if you know how to use them, knock yourself out, but you don't have to. Okay, and this is due Sunday by midnight as usual. This is a link to a website that has thousands of downloadable sounds that you can get. So feel free to take a look at this. The username and password is oswego_music. And I will talk about this in class, of course, on Wednesday and Friday. Okay, so let's get started again. First, I just want to recap how you install plugins in Logic, okay? We talked on Monday about what's called the channel strip, all right? And the channel strip, again, is this thing on the far left related to the channel that we're on. So every time I click on these channels, it's actually changing the channel strip over here to match the channel here, right? So if I'm on kick here, you can see it says kick down at the very bottom. If I go to snare, it moves to the snare. So these correspond to each other. And when I add effects, I can just go down here, go over to audio effects, click on the arrow, and find something I like. All right, now we're talking about using the stereo delay, which is the most common delay that we're going to use in general. And then down even further, the reverb. There are 4 reverbs in Logic. The Chroma Reverb is a great kind of standard reverb you can use. And then Space Designer. I don't really use these two at all, actually. This one might be an old, no, it's been updated. But, just keep that in mind. You can use any of them, but, Chroma Reverb is mostly what I talk about in here and we'll talk about for this assignment. Remember that once you install a plugin like Reverb, you can always turn it off on the far right. Sorry, that's the far left. You can click on this in the center to reopen the GUI for working on the plugin. You can also remove the plugin by clicking on the right arrows and saying no plugin, and that will take it out, okay? And that's it. Remember that even though I closed the window for the plugin, it's still running and it's still there. It's just installed and hidden, playing in the background, okay? So anyway, so let's talk about reverb and delay and how they work, right? If I go over here, so again, reverb is the persistence of a sound after a sound has been produced, right? It's the fact that sound exists in our world and is triggered in space, and therefore that space is kind of what designs that sound. This is the result of countless iterations of sound waves reflecting off of surfaces of the surrounding environment and reaching the ear at different times. And then the most important thing here with the reverb is that no distinctive repetitions are heard. What we hear really is thousands of repetitions that are so close together that it kind of just makes an ambience, right? It's just hard to describe, but that's really what's happening. So if we look at the most important plugin or parameters in reverb, the reverb time is by far the most influential effect. And the reverb time is the time in milliseconds that it takes for a reverb to dissipate completely. Okay. The next one is the room size, which also helps determine how long a reverb lasts, because as we talked about on Monday, if a room is really large, then the reverb time will be longer, right? Because the reflections will last longer, they will travel further, and what have you, okay? And again, these parameters are not always written out this way in the plugin. You kind of have to find what it's called in the plugin. Sometimes it's different. The third one is the wet, which is how much reverb is being added to the signal, all right? And then the last one is dry, how much of the original signal without reverb is being heard. So let's talk about how these things work in a plugin. So, don't worry too much about attack time. You'll see attack decay sometimes, but the big important things here are decay, and in this case, distance. This is Chromaverb right down at the bottom. So distance, decay, and then dry and wet are really going to be your biggest parameters here in this reverb. Decay is determining, of course, this is really reverb time. How long does it take the sound to decay away, right? If I increase this, then it will change. So you can see right now it's set to 1.1 seconds. And I believe if I go lower than 1 second, I'll have to test it. It goes down maybe into the decimal, or it might turn into milliseconds. It really just depends. The distance, again, is about size, right? In this reverb, if this reverb is, what am I saying? If this reverb is large, then the distance might be bigger, right? So, and in fact, I believe in here, if the distance is larger, it may actually make the decay change and go up. So we'll have to take a look at that. Then dry, how much of the original signal is coming through with no reverb on it, right? Which is actually really important to have clarity, because reverb makes everything nice and soft and mushy and beautiful, but it also takes away the clarity of, for instance, lyrics or, the nice licks of a snare drum. And then again, the wet, how much reverb is added, right? How much of the actual effect is being added in, okay? So let's look at another reverb here. This is the other one we just looked at is Chromaverb. This is the Convolution Reverb inside Logic, which is called Space Designer. And again, remember, Convolution Reverb is an actual measurement taken inside spaces and then basically mathematically reproduced inside the computer to represent or to mimic a real live space inside inside a space, right? Inside your computer, I guess. Okay, so you can see here the most important things again are the size, right? And the size of this room is also going to determine actually decay time. So decay right here is, again, in some ways, the reverb time. How long does it take the sound to dissipate completely? In this case, it's set to 1.22 seconds, right? And this will change dynamically based on the length that I give it and also the size. So if I want more reverb to last longer, then I can increase the size. I may be also able to change this dynamically, like by clicking on it and change it to 2 seconds, for instance. I'm not sure, I don't remember. And then the dry and the wet on the far right side, right? All of the signal with no reverb. And then here, basically half the reverb, right? Half of the sound with reverb, 50%. So notice that this one doesn't show you percentages. Instead, it shows you decibel levels, right? And it just depends on the plugin, how it was designed, what you're going to see in terms of actual values, all right? So let's get into then how this works in Logic, all right? So I've constructed this little drum beat just as an example, and it's just looping. Notice that I have my kick drums, my snare drums, my hi-hats, and 3 levels of hi-hats, okay? A couple things I really recommend, first of all, is that you name your tracks. It really will save you time later, because you will not, when you end up with 100 tracks like I do in projects, not naming things makes it really hard to find things. So if I double click on this, I can name this whatever I want, right? I can put my name in here. So, it's good to name your tracks. I have 3 different hi-hat tracks here because notice my panning, right? This one's panned left, this one's panned right, and this one's in the center. So I basically constructed my little hi-hat loop here, and then I went in and basically moved some of the notes into the other channels so that I would have varying panning, okay? Here's my snare, here's my kick drum. So let's listen to this a little bit. First of all, it's going to be clipping, and I'm going to have to fix that, and I will talk about that in a second. Okay, so notice that this number here is clipping, right? It's too loud. This 2 plus 2.6. I'm going to talk about this a bunch later, but basically the problem is that all of my sound combined is too intense for the main outputs. So what I need to do is select them all, turn the volume down until we don't see the red anymore in there. There, that's a good level. Okay, so now I don't see any more red in this little box here, so that's a good level. Everything's been adjusted down a little bit. So imagine, for instance, I want to add an effect onto my snare drum here. Now remember, the effects you add, they affect the entire track, right? It's a global setting for the track. So if I add reverb into this snare, every snare instance here is going to have that reverb. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to Audio Effects on the left. I'm going to click on Reverb and Chromaverb. And remember too, all the recent ones that you accessed are going to be up here. There may be nothing in here if you've never accessed a plugin before. So I'm going to go down to Reverb, Chromaverb, Stereo. All right. And you'll notice instantly a change to my drum beat because the snare now is going to have a reverb on it. Okay, now we might decide that it's a little loud. In fact, to me, just the snare in general now with the reverb on it is a little intense. So I turned it down. Okay, I may want just a little bit less too, so I'm taking the decay down. There we go. Okay, so you can hear that I can change it now. I'm going to talk about this later, but basically I'm able to EQ the frequencies. What's really cool about reverb, of course, is that when a sound reflects off of a surface, it doesn't reflect every frequency that the initial sound made, right? Depending on the type of surface, some frequencies in that signal might be absorbed while others reflect. So for instance, you might hear only low sounds in a reverb. You might hear only high sounds, okay? And that's what you can see is happening here, actually. At the 1,000 mark, right, 1,000 hertz, we have some dips here in the decibel level, right? So we're basically lowering some frequencies at 2,000 hertz, and that's kind of softening the intensity in that level. Now let me show you what happens when I turn this up. So you can hear how the reverb gets brighter, right? It gets louder and higher in pitch, tinnier. It makes a tinnier sound to it, okay? So anyway, so that is adding reverb. Now, one other thing that I wanted to show you is that remember, we talked about this on Monday. I can go up here to factory default and go down to the bottom, and there are all kinds of plugins, right? Or what are called presets. These are preset parameters that you can choose, and then all the knobs and sliders will move to fit that preset. So if I hit dirty chamber, for example, I'm going to get something different, right? So you can hear now it's a little poppier, it's just a little bit different. If I change that to drum chamber, so anyways, so remember that these presets can be really useful. Especially when you're dealing with large synths and stuff that have just so many knobs and sliders, you don't know what to even start with. Starting with a preset is a good idea, okay? So I have added the reverb now. Now I want to talk about adding a delay, okay? Let's take a look at what delay is again. So A delay, or what's called an echo, is distinctive repetitions of an audio source, okay? And these are measured with these most important parameters: delay time and gain reduction, which is called feedback. And, this image shows you that in general, what happens is we have a sound source and it goes out the speakers, right? But what a delay does is the sound is going out the main speaker instantly, but then it's also being held for a certain amount of milliseconds and then outputting again, okay? So that's why we hear the sound several times, is that a delay is diverting the signal in addition into a delay loop, basically, and repeating it. So, and then again, one of the most important factors here is the feedback. So what we do then again is we send the signal through again into the loop, and we reduce its volume so that it feeds back in. Now what this does is it creates what's called a feedback loop, where the sound is dissipating over time, but it's repeating incessantly, right? So the most important things again are the delay time, the time in milliseconds for the interval of repeats, right? What is the interval of repeating? And really important here is that usually this is a parameter of tempo, right? Or milliseconds. So, and what I mean by tempo is like you can set it to the quarter note or the eighth note in whatever tempo your song is in. In milliseconds, of course, it's just milliseconds. Feedback amount, this parameter indicates the dB level of the reflections on each pass, usually a reduction in dB each pass. Actually, it's always a reduction in dB each pass. Otherwise, you end up with, I can show you, a delay that never ends, okay? So the mix is how much delay is reflected from the original signal, okay? So let's take a look now at adding a delay in Logic. So again, I'm going to leave my nice little reverb. In fact, let me actually go back to this. I'm going to go back to the factory default, which is called recall default, and I'm going to turn my decay back down. So I have a nice little reflection on there, but not too much, okay? Now I'm going to go and add underneath a delay. So I go right underneath that chroma verb, and I go down to delay, and I'm going to choose stereo delay, stereo, okay? And it pulls up the stereo delay. Now, most commonly, we have two channels. So you can see in the delay here, we have the left channel and the right channel, right? And often these are in different rhythmic patterns or rhythmic values to kind of create a ping-pongy effect, okay? Which can be really beautiful and interesting. So a couple of most important parameters. As we talked about, the delay time is essential, right? Establishing when these repetitions happen in terms of interval. This tempo sync button is going to sync my delay to be in the tempo of the music. Now watch what happens when I unclick this. You can see that my delay time right here just switched to milliseconds, right? If I turn this on, it switches to note values, and you can see I have quarter notes, eighth notes here showing up, all right? And the same thing is true, of course, with the left channel. So let's listen to what this sounds like right now. Another thing to notice that the mix output, right? So if the initial volume is 100, just as an arbitrary number, that means the first reflection is going to be at 30%, right? 30, basically, all right? So let's hear this. Okay, so you're hearing these reflections now. My drum beat's kind of playing da-da-da basically twice or three times, which is kind of interesting, right? The values of these are what are making it sound like it's coming ping-ponging on the left and right channels. If I switch this to quarter notes, listen to what happens. Right? So you're hearing it repeating, but you're not getting that ping pong effect from the speakers because they're not different on the left and the right sides. Okay? So as I mentioned too, one of the most interesting things is this feedback, right? Feedback is going to determine how long the repetitions last. okay? So, and let me show you what I mean by that. I'm just going to actually go out here. I'm going to swing out here to the left or the right. I'm going to grab one of these and drop it here and loop this. All right, let me actually just move the looper over here. Okay, so now I just have a single instance of this sound so you can hear what it does. Okay, so listen to what happens now if I go into my delay and I up the feedback amount. Let's put it at 80% for both channels, okay? So what this means now is every time the sound goes back through the feedback loop, it's going to reduce by only 20%, right? So it's going to last way longer, right? Kind of a cool sound. So that's going to just play and play and play. And again, if I have this at 100%, the loop is never going to end, right? It's going to delay forever because every time it goes back through the loop, it's still at full volume. So there is no decaying of the sound at 100%. So this will just play and play and play. In fact, Logic does something, I think, that's still reducing the gain. But anyway, so if I want to have a really quick decay of the sound, I can lower it way down. At 17%, we probably only will hear one reflection, then it'll be over. Now a little bit longer, but still shorter, right? 50%, it's going to last longer, okay? So anyways, that is essentially what a delay does, right? And it's a really cool effect, very useful, very commonly used, yeah? And we hear this all the time. Now, once again, in the stereo delay, I can go up here to factory default and pull up one of these presets, right? You know, one thing cool about doing this, using delay, for instance, is you all get a lot of cool ping pong panning stuff. So it's a really quick way to create complexity in your drums, right? Especially if I put them on hi-hats, you can end up with some really neat hi-hat effects. So it can be really interesting. It's really cool too on vocals, but it can easily basically make your vocals unintelligible because the sounds are overlapping so much that you can't hear the initial signal well enough to understand what's happening. Okay? So, anyways, I think that is it for this video. This also covers, of course, your Daily 10, which I will be posting today. There's a Daily 10 about reverb and delay, which is going to go up shortly. It's right here. And I will share a link also to this video that I'm making right now. And I will see you in class on Wednesday and on Friday.